Good evening. My name is Gavin Colvert. As the head of Stella Maris Academy, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our school this evening and to the first in a series of conversations about the integrated classical advantage. Although we are live streaming this event, we really want this to be a conversation and we encourage you to participate. Our speaker will take some questions from the live stream at the end of his remarks. You can comment on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, or you can message the Stella Maris Academy Facebook page with your questions. In this talk, Father Joseph Illo will explain how, through the integration of the sacramental, we infuse God into all aspects of your school, of our school. If you're longing for your children to be more deeply connected with the faith, this talk is for you. At Stella Maris Academy, we believe that an integrated classical Catholic curriculum is the most effective way to educate our children for the world and to set them on the path to heaven. This series of conversations is designed to introduce you to the benefits of our curriculum and help you as you consider the best choice to provide for your child's education. God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Colvert, and it's a pleasure to be here in this model classroom here at the future Stella Maris Academy, which we will open in August. As Gavin was speaking, he said he referred to the school as first your school, and then he corrected himself, our school. It is our school. It's your school. We hope that some of you, at least, who are watching, will enroll your children for this August. We have 3 conversations planned for this live stream audience, but hopefully soon we'll be able to meet in person in this very lovely model classroom here at Stella Maris. My talk is the first of 3, entitled Raising Saints, Integrating Faith and Reason. The next will be on January 30th at 10 a.m. Greg Meck will speak on fulfilling the promise of STEM, classical education. And finally, Gavin will present on February 3rd, a week from tonight at 7 p.m., Forming Character, Inspiring the Moral Imagination. What's the purpose of our 3 talks? We are here to articulate the rationale for establishing here in San Francisco a traditional classical school in a progressive city, a challenging endeavor. And why would we want to do that? And why is this kind of school distinctive? Why would you want to send your kids here rather than to another school? That is the topic. We'll articulate that in 3 different areas as we go through these talks. But I would say in sum, it is simply, if I may be permitted to say so, a better curriculum, a better way of doing things, a better way of educating. We will explain and defend that claim in these next 3 talks. I will speak from the Catholic perspective, the spiritual or religious perspective. Obviously, I'm the pastor, the priest here at Star of the Sea Church, and as the chaplain, so to speak, of Stella Maris Academy. We say that the program is an integrated classical Catholic. So I'll be speaking about the Catholic. Gavin will be speaking about the integrated, and Greg about the classic. Léon Blois was a French novelist, died in 1917. And he famously said, for a committed Catholic, the only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint. We were born to become holy, to become close to God and close to each other. The only tragedy in life is not to become a saint. And so what should a Catholic school do? but form saints, raise up saints to the glory of God and the upbuilding of the human family. Well, what is a saint? A saint, of course, coming from the word holy in Latin, sanctus, a saint is a person who inherits heaven at the end of his life. You have to be a saint to get to heaven. Everybody wants to go to heaven, and therefore, implicitly, everybody wants to be a saint. If we don't get to heaven, we lose. Our life has been a real failure. And that is why Leon Blois says the only real failure is to miss heaven, not to be a saint. It's often said in the classical movement, we are educating for heaven, not for Harvard. Harvard is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. In fact, Harvard used to educate for heaven. Harvard was founded as a school in 1636, named after John Harvard, the benefactor. Harvard, like many of the great universities of our nation, was founded to train people for service of the church. Harvard was to train Unitarian and Congregationalist ministers to serve, to preach, to teach, to lead churches. We're educating for heaven, not for Harvard. To which one might reply, well, Harvard ain't bad either. And that's true. But Harvard without heaven, you lose. Harvard without heaven is hell. We have to have both. We have to have at least heaven, even if you don't make it to Harvard. God wants to give us both. Your child can be both a saint and a scholar. But first, you must be a saint. First, holiness, and then all the good things follow. That's the premise of a Catholic classic education. First, we have to be a good person. We have to be honest. We have to be hardworking. We have to be a lover of God and of God's creation. That's what a saint is. One, a lover of God. And if we start there, if we make that our primary objective, then all the rest of the good things will follow. We will be intelligent. We will be hardworking. We will be honest. We will be successful. And if not successful in every way in this world, we will be faithful to God and to each other. That's raising saints. Now we'll get to the integration of faith and reason in just a bit, but a few other considerations before we do that. Saints are good people. They're good to be around. You want saints in your home. You want good, beautiful people. In fact, you want to be a saint yourself. If we think deeply about what holiness means, it means integration. It means being at peace with ourselves and the world. It means human flourishing. What is a saint in this life? We know that saints go to heaven. That's the final definition of a saint, is one who makes it to heaven. But what about this life? I would say a saint in this life, a good person, a holy person, is someone who sees the world sacramentally. I want to speak a little bit now about the sacramentality of a Catholic education, the sacramental vision. Sacramental vision is seeing everything as good, a reflection of God's goodness, a reflection of truth, beauty, and the love of God. I used to work at another parish, and it was a big parish. We had a big communications department with 3 staff, and the director of communications had these wooden letters 3 feet high above the communications department. It said, the letter said, "It's all good." It was a way of keeping her focused on the goodness of what we're communicating. What are we communicating in a parish? What are we communicating in our families? Goodness. We have to be first convicted that it's all good. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Genesis chapter 1. Well, we want to see like God. We want to see the goodness, the inherent beauty and order in all of creation and all of reality. And that's what a Catholic sacramental vision means. By entering this world, our Lord Jesus Christ made it good. He sanctified all that is by becoming part of it. He transformed our flesh by taking flesh. Everything is sacred because it is made by God. Everything is good if we have the eyes to see it. A Catholic education is to give us that capacity to see the goodness, the order in all of creation. That's what we want to do for your children, to give them that sacramental vision. You might say this is a whole person education, because if we understand that everything is good, then educating everything in the child for the good is part and parcel of a classical education. That every part of the human person is good, and so all of it has to be educated. So the body is good. The body is sacramental. It's a sign of God's presence in the world. It's a sign of goodness. So we educate the body. How do we educate the body? By training the body to be healthy, sports, and the Greeks developed this classical approach to education. That's why we call it classical. They developed the so-called gymnasium, which wasn't just a gym like I have behind me with basketball hoops, but it was a whole center of training and disciplining the body, making the body flourish. And so classical education pays attention to the body, the health, the goodness, the beauty of the human body. A classical education also educates the senses of the child. Seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, hearing nature's wonders. Math and science would be where the sensory experience of a child is opened up and perfected. So the math and science in our integrated curriculum would be windows for the children to see the beauty and order of God's creation. I can remember studying biology in 9th grade and marveling at the complexities, the perfections of the order of the human body and of the plant kingdoms and the rocks, and not biology, but in biology we studied all the living things. And it filled me with a wonder that I can see and taste and discover God's presence by studying biology. The soul, there's the body, there's the senses, there's the soul is another component of the human person. And so I wanted to quote Plato. There's a book that I'm quoting from called Renewing Catholic Schools, edited by R. Jared Stout. And in an article that he wrote in that book that just came out actually from the Institute of Catholic Liberal Education, he quotes Plato in how we address, how we educate the soul. Plato wrote in the Republic, musical training, and so it's music, poetry, art that educates and forms the soul, which is a very important part of classical education. Plato wrote 2,500 years ago, musical training is a more potent instrument than any other because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul, on which they might mightily fasten, imparting grace and making the soul of him who is rightly educated graceful, of him who is ill-educated ungraceful, and also because he who has received this true education of the inner being will most shrewdly perceive omissions or faults in art and nature, and with a true taste, while he praises and rejoices over and receives into his soul the good, he becomes noble and good. He will justly blame and hate the bad now and in the days of his youth. Educating the soul is simply educating in taste, imparting good taste, a natural savor for what is beautiful and rightly ordered. So poetry, art, music, literature. So we educating the whole person, because the whole person is good. We educate the body, we educate the senses, the soul of the child, the memory of the child. Here's where history comes into play. History is greatly undervalued in our time. But in classical education, history has a large part of this integrated curriculum because we depend on memory, not only individual memory, but communal memory, the memory of a people. We don't invent history, we discover it. And so to try to understand where we came from will help us know where we are going. History educates and perfects the memory of the human person. And finally, the imagination. And this is where literature comes in. Literature gives our children a moral imagination to think beyond what they've discovered in their own experiences, but to learn and imagine the experiences of others, to apply them to their lives. Gavin will talk a little bit more about this in a week in his talk on forming character, the moral imagination. But literature has a big part to play. And so literature has a primary, not a primary, but a very important part in this integrated education. I might say also the lives of the saints are very important here. The literature of hagiography, of reading the lives of those who have battled and overcome the difficulties of life and become holy, is a very large part of the literature that we would teach. What's the difference between an integrated classical education and a standard or common core education that most children receive today? That's the bottom line. Why would I want to send my kid to this school? What's distinct about it? Well, two differences. And I'll finish with these. First difference is that all branches of study are integrated in this kind of approach to education. Why? Because the human person is an integrated complex. The body-soul composite, the 5 or 6 components of the human person I just mentioned, that this education addresses all of them: the physical body, the senses, the imagination, the emotions, the soul, the memory. They're all accounted for, they're all addressed, they're all educated in an integrated curriculum which intersects and touches all parts of the human person. Catholic tradition is uniquely suited because of its richly developed anthropology, its understanding of the human person, to educate the human person. That is why traditionally or historically, Catholic education has been so successful in years past. Now, Catholic education, if you'll permit me to say so, has lost a little bit of its way, its a traditional way of teaching the child. And the classical curriculum movement is recapturing that, is restoring a time-tested and proven effective way of educating, addressing the whole person according to Catholic anthropology. The human person is more than merely a meat machine. And so you wouldn't want education just to educate the physical body. We are more than merely a bundle of desires and emotions and feelings. We are more than merely an autonomous will, a will to power. The human person is not only a complex of emotions or a mass of firing neurons and synapses. All of these reductionist anthropologies describe a part of the human person. It's the integrated classical Catholic approach to education that addresses or accounts for all of the components of the human person. The Catholic intellectual tradition describes the whole person, and Catholic classic education forms the whole person. That's distinctive from other educational methods that reduce the human person to this or that, and education focuses on one or more. It's a truncated. I just think that the Catholic approach, the classical approach, is the whole person approach that addresses the full reality. Let me give you an example from our own school. As you know, we've had a school in this Star of the Sea parish since 1909, founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph. And one of our 8th grade teacher 2 years ago, Mrs. Deborah Darmer, related an experience of how all the branches of knowledge were integrated in her classroom. She tells the story that in her literature class, she was reading a poem by Lord Byron, who died in 1815. Lord Byron wrote a poem called By the Waters of Babylon. And she had finished this, and then she made the bridge to the history. History was the next lesson. So she began teaching about Babylon, the Babylonian culture and empire in history. And then in religion class, she moved to the Psalms. And one of the Psalms, Psalm 137, speaks of, that's where Lord Byron got this quote, by the waters of Babylon, we hung up our harps when they asked us to sing the songs of Jerusalem. And so on those 3 levels, religion class, history class, and literature class, they heard the same reference to the waters of Babylon. And then unexpectedly, they went to music class. And what did the music teacher teach these kids? How to sing the psalm for that Sunday. It was Psalm 137. And she saw their faces light up. And they said to each other, we know what this means. We know the historical significance of the waters of Babylon. We know the poetic dimension. We know what it meant to the Jewish people from our religion class, from the scriptures. And now we're singing that in a musical setting done by a composer 200 or 300 years ago. And the joy, the understanding in their faces was something to behold, she said, because they hadn't expected it. It's this wonder that came upon them without their expecting it. I want to talk finally about faith and reason, how an integrated curriculum integrates faith and reason. But first, a little discourses from my own life. I was placed in Catholic school grades 1 through 3. I didn't go to kindergarten, but when I was still 4 years old, my mother plopped me down in 1st grade. I'm a December baby, so I turned 5 pretty quickly after I got to 1st grade, but I got a little jump on things, and I was still, so I was a year younger than a lot of the kids in 1st grade. Our teacher's name was Sister Rose. It was St. Jerome's School in West Long Branch, New Jersey. The year was 1967, I think, 1966. And it had been a difficult day for Sister Rose in the classroom. She was a bit exasperated, and she threw up her hands, and she said, you can imagine this sister in her full habit with the headgear and the big black rosary jangling from her belt. And she said, she had glasses on, and she seemed to be 105 years old to me. I think she was probably about 38 or something. And she said, you children have been so misbehaved today. Why do you think I do this? Why do you think I gave my life to teaching? And everybody got very quiet. But I raised my hand and I said, because you love us, Sister Rose? And Sister Rose melted. She came over and gave me a kiss on the forehead. I was mortified, of course. Everybody was laughing and sniggering. And Sister Rose taught me how to love. And then she taught us how to read. She taught us how to love God and to respect and love each other. And she taught us how to read and to do our ciphers, to do our arithmetic. She did both. She showed us that a reasonable person is a faithful person, and a believer is smart and intellectual in the ways of rationality as well. Faith is in an all-good God and the inherent goodness of everything he has made gives us the moral imagination, the courage to discover the rational order of the natural world. Why would I be fascinated by math and science if I didn't believe in a good God who had ordered and created them? If the world is good, given to us in love by an all-wise creator, then I want to understand it. I want to know what I love, what fascinates me. He who loves longs to understand what he loves. And that's why the best scientists are believers. They believe in an underlying order in the natural world. They believe that there's inherent goodness worth discovering, and they assiduously apply themselves to the sciences in that spirit. They believe that things can be known because a rational God, the Word incarnate, the Logos, has given us the capacity to know the wonderful order that he has made. That's why the scientific method of inquiry was developed in the Western world by Catholics, many of them priests. What Gavin has put in this model classroom we have a poster of Father Georges Lemaitre, who discovered or formulated the Big Bang Theory, an astronomer, Father Gregor Mendel, who the father of modern genetics, and Sister Mary Kenneth Keller, the pioneer in computer science, a Catholic sister, of course. So these are some examples of consecrated Catholics. Now, there are many, many, many other Catholics, not priests and nuns, who have become great scientists. And I would say the best scientists are those who believe in the underlying order and knowability of all of creation. Faith inspires reason, and reason explains faith. And this is the second distinction, the second reason. I mentioned first, why would you choose this kind of school over other schools? First, because it's an integrated whole person education. But second, because a classical Catholic education sees all things sacramentally, as reflections of God's loving order. It believes in a fundamental order in the universe. It inspires wonder, which drives the scientific curiosity, scientific inquiry. I want to finish, before taking some questions, with what I think is a good summary in this article I read by R. Jared Stout, from the book Renewing Catholic Schools, just out from Catholic Educational Press in Washington, sponsored by the ICLE, Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. And this article I'm reading actually is given to me by Gavin. Thank you, Gavin. And it's entitled Educating the Whole Person, a Sacramental Approach to Education. So in summary, he writes in this article, wisdom, the right ordering and application of knowledge, requires a complete foundation. Catholic education addresses the entire person, preparing students for eternal happiness, which includes the resurrection of our bodies. With this goal in mind, a sacramental approach to teaching begins with hands-on experience and physical discipline. So hands-on experience in science class, physical discipline in sports, and right eating and sleeping and such, begins with hands-on experience in physical discipline, inspires emotions and imagination in truth, beauty, and goodness through the arts, music, literature, poetry, and roots education in the context of the living tradition of Christian culture, history, and literature. That's why, if I had kids, I would send them to a school that we are starting here in San Francisco in August, Stella Maris Academy. Thank you for listening and watching. Now, if there is any time for questions.
So yes, Father, I think we have some questions from our listening audience and our watching audience. The first question picks up on the end of your talk. The question is, doesn't every good Catholic school aim at making saints? How is Stella Maris Academy distinctive in this regard?
Very good question. And without questioning the good intentions and the good work that are done in many of the Catholic schools, every Catholic school, yes, aims at forming saints. But I would say Stella Maris, we've taken a step back and said to ourselves, is this the primary driving force is this the primary motivation for what we're trying to do here? Is this front and center? So for example, Mass for Catholics is the source and summit of our faith and of our lives on earth and our lives in heaven. And so in the Eucharist. So we would have weekly Mass, and not every Catholic school has weekly Mass. Many of them have monthly Masses. We would also have a fully vested music program, a sacred music program. So teaching children how to sing by including and including in large measure sacred music. So polyphony, Gregorian chant, learning from the great masters who more or less, I would say more than less, use the scriptures as the basis of their music. You think of things like Handel's Messiah, or even something like Vivaldi's The Four Seasons is a praise of God for the beauty of the seasons. And Vivaldi, of course, was a Italian Catholic. So I think the answer is, well, what are we doing? How are we raising saints better than other schools? I hope we can. We'll do our best, but we're focusing on, as Gavin has said, theology or spirituality is the integrating factor among all the disciplines. When we teach math, and when we teach history, and when we teach biology, we do it as an act of praise to God, and knowing that to understand the world, first we need to understand the creator of the world.
So you may have already answered this question, but the questioner asks, you say that the sacramental will be integrated in the curriculum. Is it just that the kids will go to Mass?
Now, as I mentioned, the music program would also be sacramental, but it's not just, so the sacramental would characterize this approach to education in the sense that everything we study, everything we experience, we would understand as from God, or a reflection of his truth, beauty, and goodness. Is that answering your question?
Well, we'll have to see. Maybe there'll be a follow-up. We have a practical question. Is Stella Maris Academy under the umbrella of the Archdiocese of San Francisco? Is it a parochial school? And do you intend to seek accreditation for the school? And what about the tuition structure?
Well, very practical questions. So we are under the aegis of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. The superintendent of schools of this archdiocese asked me 3 years ago to attend a classical education seminar with her and her colleagues in Washington, D.C. at St. Jerome Academy in Hyattsville, Maryland. And that's how this all got started, because she asked that our school become a pilot classical curriculum school. So of course, we are under the supervision and support of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. We are a parochial school. We're not a private school. We're owned by the Archdiocese, and we take our direction from the Archdiocese. In that vein, of course, we will take the children will take all the standard testing that all the children do in the Archdiocese. And of course, we will obtain accreditation. Tuition structure. Our baseline tuition is $10,000 a year, which puts us kind of in the middle. There are some Catholic schools above that, some below that. But $10,000 a year with a $1,000 a year discount if you're a registered contributing parishioner in any parish in the Archdiocese, not just our parish, Star of the Sea, but if you're pastor at the cathedral or St. Dominic's or St. Augustine's in South City recommends that you receive the tuition discount, we will give, so that'll be $9,000. And then there are multiple children discounts, 15% for the second child, 25% for the third child. And then finally, because of generous benefactors who want to see this kind of a school flourish, we have we have a lot of tuition assistance and scholarship money available. So no child, our goal, of course, is that no child be turned away. I think, depending on the grace of God, as Mother Teresa once said, don't worry about money. God has lots of it. And if God wants your child to go to this school, then we'll find a way.
So we have another question. Do you envision that the teachers in the school will teach in accord with the church's magisterium? And how will they deal with controversial questions in culture with students?
The answer to the first question, of course, yes, that we are a fully Catholic school, so we will teach in accord with the defined magisterium of the church. There are many hot button issues, of course, in today's culture. The church is becoming increasingly countercultural, or I should say the culture is becoming different than the church. I think the church is staying the same. The culture is evolving, let us say. And so where there are controversies, we will adhere to the magisterium of the church in charity and patience, but firmness, that the truth will set you free. That is our conviction. And God will provide a way for us to speak and live the truth that he gives us.
So I think we have time for just one last question. How do you envision the integration of prayer into the daily schedule of the school in order to support children's development in their holiness?
Good question. Well, we haven't fleshed this out, but for example, I would think that at 12 noon, we all stop and say the Angelus together, that there'll be a prayer time in the beginning of the day and a prayer time at the end of the day. And at least once a week, we would pray the rosary together as a school body. And of course, there's Sunday Mass. And then we would have students coming over to serve Masses on a daily basis and therefore be exposed like that. And then there are retreats throughout the year and speakers that will come in. The priests will be very involved in the school, perhaps even teaching in the school. That's what we're hoping we can pull off, is some of our priests can teach religion and what we're competent to do. And so bring in prayer like that. Well, thank you all for watching and listening.